started working the night shift at our local Walmart not long ago. Fresh out of college with a degree in philosophy, you can bet your bottom dollar that absolutely no career doors flung open for me. Walmart was supposed to be a temporary fix, a nocturnal pit stop. Yet here I am, still stacking shelves and listening to the eerie hum of freezers at 3 a.m. Let me tell you something about our Walmart. It doesn't feel right at night. I expected it to be dull and monotonous, the kind of gig where you zone out, finish your tasks, and go home. But this place, it's got an ambience that wasn't listed in the job description. First day on the job, the manager handed me a crumpled set of rules. I joked, "What is this place haunted?" He didn't laugh. Rule number 1, always greet your entrance. Now, that might sound like typical corporate feel-goodery, but here's the catch. It didn't mean greeting the customers. It meant saying a clear hello to the empty, shadowy expanse as you punch in. Silly, absolutely. Did I do it? Every single night after I saw Keith, the other night guy, whispering a tentative good evening into the dim, chilly air. The first oddities were subtle, easy to brush off as fatigue. The anti-theft sensors would beep long after the store had locked down for the night, yet there would be no one there. Cold drafts slithered down aisles with no logical source. The faint smell of decay occasionally wafted through the store, which I initially attributed to expired products, till I realized it came strongest from the clothing section. Keith was a sparse man, words and flesh alike. One frosty evening, after we were finishing reshelving some overstock, he told me rule number 2 with his usual stilted delivery. Always reset the toy section last, just before you leave in the morning. Why, kids' spirits can't rest without their toys in order or what? I laughed. Just do it, he snapped, a twitch in his eyes I hadn't seen before. So I did. Every morning, just as the sky hinted at dawn, I made sure every plushie and action figure was neatly aligned. It felt stupid, but harmless. Harmless, that is, until the morning I found every single doll turned with its face to the wall. Seeing this, a chill that had nothing to do with the store's over-enthusiastic air conditioning ran through me. I turned them back around, my hands slightly trembling, an irrational fear gripping me. Maybe Keith's rule wasn't so arbitrary. Then there were the whispers. If you've never heard them, you might think your mind is playing tricks on you. I did, initially. They started as murmurs I could barely catch, like someone reciting a shopping list under their breath. The source was never traceable, bouncing from the aisles of canned foods to the racks of faded jeans. One night, I was restocking some cereal when I distinctly heard my name, Sam. Exhaled so softly, it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand. I spun around, half expecting to face a prank-playing coworker, but instead, my eyes met aisle after aisle of unending, indifferent products. It was later that evening or early that morning, depending on how you look at it, that I first broke a rule. I was tired, my feet ached, and in an act of rebellion, I didn't greet the store when I entered. Nothing happened at first, and I chuckled to myself, foolish for ever thinking it mattered. But as I began my duties, the atmosphere felt denser, charged with a silent disapproval. The lights flickered more aggressively, the whispers grew to a persistent muttering, and I felt watched from shadows that seemed deeper and more numerous than before. The real kicker came when I went to clock out. My employee ID wouldn't scan. I tried again and again, the beeps of denial growing almost mocking. That's when it appeared, printed on a new sheet of laminated paper pinned next to the clock machine. Rule number 5, it read in a stark, menacing type, "Don't forget to say goodbye." As if on cue, the air shifted, and the murmurings halted with an abruptness that sucked the breath from my lungs. I swallowed, my mouth dry, and managed a shaky, "Good night, Walmart." The machine beeped cheerily, accepting my ID smoothly on the next attempt, as if nothing had happened. I don't know what to make of all this, whether it's a series of elaborate pranks or something else entirely. But as I left, the automatic doors hesitated, sliding closed with a slow, almost deliberate creak. Whatever it was, it listened, it waited, and it seemed to say, very clearly, that I wasn't alone. The whisper of the doors as they finally shut behind me put a shiver up my spine that didn't unfurl until I was several blocks away from the library. I had sought refuge there among the musty aisles and stale air, surrounded by knowledge bound in cracked leather and yellowed pages. The library had always been my sanctuary, a place to find answers. Today, it felt like the center of my disquiet. Outside, dusk crept over the sea, idy like a spreading stain, deepening the shadows into inky pools that whispered with unseen movements. The streetlights flickered on, their halos weak and tremulous against the encroaching darkness. Each step I took echoed oddly on the pavement, a hollow sound that seemed chased by a softer, wetter echo, a squelch, a queasy, sticking noise, as if someone was walking behind me with damp feet. I quickened my pace, attributing the sound to my frazzled nerves. But every time I stopped, waiting for a crossing signal or a break in traffic, the sound halted too, an instant after mine ceased. A psychological echo, I told myself, nothing more. At the corner of 5th and Lexington, I dared a glance over my shoulder. The street lay deserted behind me, bathed in the fluctuating glow of the streetlights. But there, in the second circle of light from where I stood, I saw it, a shadow that didn't belong. It was stretched and misshapen, swelling unnaturally with each ripple of the wind-disturbed light. Watching it, I felt a prickly feeling in the back of my neck, the undeniable sense of eyes on me. I moved quickly, too quickly, my feet tangling as I turned back to my path. I stumbled, catching myself on a lamppost, and in that vulnerable moment I heard it, a soft, moist exhale, almost like a sigh, close enough that I felt the warmth against my ear. My heart bolted in my chest, a frantic drumming that seemed too loud in the quiet street. There was nothing there when I whipped around, only swirling particles of dust in the lamplight. The way home had never seemed so long, my apartment a distant beacon. I kept moving, my eyes darting to every flicker in the periphery, to every alley I passed, every narrow space between the buildings. Each held potential for unseen watchers, for the source of that soft, unbearable sigh. Home should have been a relief, a safe enclosure. But when I closed the door behind me, the security I sought eluded me. The darkness of my apartment seemed too complete, every corner a deeper shade of black. I fumbled for the light switch, my fingers clumsy and trembling. Light spilled into the room, stark and unwelcoming, throwing harsh shadows that seemed to flicker with subtle, mocking movements. I steadied my breathing, scolded myself for letting the night get to me. This was my home, my domain, familiar and controlled. Yet the sigh had followed me, or so it felt, a barely audible intake of breath that seemed both from everywhere and nowhere. Too agitated to sit, I moved to the kitchen, the usual evening rituals of cooking, of preparation, now acts of anchoring, each task a lifeline to normalcy. The sound of the knife chopping, the sizzle of the pan, these were the realities I clung to. The apartment gradually warmed with the smell of garlic and onions, grounding me further in the tangible. It was then, as I stirred the pot, that the power cut out. A gust of wind rattled the windows, a storm heralding its approach with a roar. Darkness enveloped the room instantly, deep and absolute, my only light the stuttering illumination from a dying street lamp that filtered through shaking branches. In the profound black, the sounds of the city seemed to pull away, leaving an oppressive silence. It was in this silence that the wet squelching returned, louder now, unmistakable. It approached with regular, deliberate slaps against the hardwood floor, from the front door, across the living room, towards the kitchen where I stood frozen, spoon in hand, too petrified to stir. Somewhere impossibly near, the sigh sounded again, frosted with breath, concluding with a soft, mucus chuckle. My hand sought the nearest knife by instinct, the cold steel a slim reassurance as the laughter echoed, chillingly mirthful. I stood at the threshold of knowing, of seeing, the horror that stalked so close. Yet, there was part of me, a screaming, irrational part, that wasn't sure I wanted to witness the face attached to these sounds, this presence haunting the sprawling darkness of my suddenly alien apartment. The door to my apartment swayed slightly, a soft yet disturbing creak echoing down the hall as if the house itself were inhaling, preparing to speak. My hand hovered next to the light switch, trembling. I knew I should flip it, flood the space with light, chase away the unnerving shadows stretching like fingers along the floor. But my body felt locked in a strange dance of resistance, each muscle fiber singing a chorus of dread. With a gulp, I nudged the door further open, the familiar squeak now sinister in its whisper. The air smelled different, as if the darkness had a scent, musky and damp, a signature of the unseen. A chill danced down my spine, and I stepped forward, my feet finding the cold, hard floor more a curiosity than a decision. No, I whispered to myself, not now, as if I could command the enveloping fear to halt, to retreat back into the nothingness from where it surely came. Another step and sense of intrusion deepened. This space, my home, now felt like a part of a somber melody played in a minor key. Yet, under the orchestration of shadows and sounds, there was another layer, slight shuffling noises coming from the kitchen. The soft drag of a foot, or was it a hand? The sound of cloth against the tile floor, slow, deliberate, torturous. This was no longer my sanctuary. Nearly propelled by an instinctual force, I reached the living room. The outline of my furniture loomed like specters in a mist, familiar yet distorted by the darkness. The coffee table, usually littered with magazines and remote controls, was clear, its surface reflecting the faint moonlight sneaking through the blinds. Something about the cleanliness felt wrong, staged. Then the silhouette moved. Not more than a shadow at first, it seemed a trick of the light, or perhaps my fraying sanity. But as my eyes adjusted, the contours of a human-like form became discernible, sitting on my sofa, head cocked in an unnatural angle, as if listening intently to the rhythm of my heart. Frozen, my breath caught in my chest, terror clawed at my throat, trying to stifle a scream. It was the waiting that wore thin my resolve, the not knowing what this thing wanted. I strained to make out features, but it remained achingly vague, a blur against the reality of my living room. "Who are you?" My voice emerged as a choked whisper, regretting the sound as soon as it left my lips. Talking to it somehow made it more real, more present, more dangerous. The figure didn't respond but shifted slightly, a subtle but unmistakably purposeful movement. A glint of something, perhaps eyes, perhaps not, caught the meager light. My heart battered against my chest as if pleading for escape, each thump echoing too loudly in the silent apartment. I should run, I thought. Leave this place, this moment, this nightmare. Yet my feet betrayed me, rooted to the worn rug beneath them. The figure rose slowly, the movement fluid as if unburdened by human anatomy. I stumbled backward, finally regaining control over my limbs, driven by the visceral need to survive. "No, no, no," I stammered, my back colliding with the cold surface of the front door. A barrier too flimsy now to promise any real safety. It stood, towering over my crumpled form, head tilted in morbid curiosity, or perhaps mockery. What stood before me wasn't a person, not any longer, if ever it was. Its features were obscured by the dark, but the malice was palpable, a radiating cold that numbed my skin. Just as it took a step forward, the faint hum of my cell phone broke the stasis. The sound seemed alien, incongruous with the tableau of terror. Its gaze, if it had one, flicked momentarily toward the sound, granting me a splinter of time. Darting sideways, I scrambled towards the cell phone, grabbing it with trembling hands. With no plan other than escape, I flung myself into the bathroom, slamming the door shut and locking it with a swift, desperate move. My heart thrummed against my ribs, my breath ragged and loud in the sudden silence. Pressing my back against the door, I dialed 911, the phone slipping in my sweaty grip. "Please," I gasped into the phone. "Something's in my house." Outside, the shadow paused at the door, its presence looming as a suffocating certainty. Its intentions unclear, its desire to intrude incontestable. As the operator's voice cracked through the speaker, asking for my location, a sharp, unyielding knock thudded against the door. I gulped, my throat a dry scratch as another knock resonated, louder, more demanding. Hunched beside the couch, I clutched the phone tighter, the voice on the other end lost in a sea of static that hissed with urgency. I'm at 652 West Elm Street," I stammered, swallowing the lump forming in my throat. "Please hurry." Confirming noises trickled through the phone as the dispatcher promised the imminent arrival of help. Yet every concession made by the clock seemed an elaborate betrayal. The knock surged again, this time followed by a prolonged scrape, like fingernails against wood, deliberate, slow. I flinched, backing away to the darkest corner of the room, my eyes fixed on the front door as it shuddered slightly under the latest assault. The house felt eerily silent following this, the only sound my ragged breathing and the distant, otherworldly whisper of wind caressing the eaves. That silence grew oppressive, heavy, as if the air was thickening, preparing for something unspeakable. Suddenly, from what seemed like under my own skin, a cold, sickening creak of floorboards resonated, far too close for comfort. The shadow, or whatever harbored the intent to terrorize me, now appeared to be inside, its presence suggested by barely audible shifts in the silence that had become a canvas for my escalating fear. As I stared into the dim foyer, I thought I saw something, a distortion in the air, like the shimmer of heat on pavement. But it was too subtle, too transient. I blinked, and it was gone, replaced by the undeniable feeling of being watched. The sensation clawed at the primitive parts of my brain, urging me to flee, but my body was a statue of dread. In a desperate attempt to rationalize my terror, I tried convincing myself it was just a burglar, that the strange phenomena were tricks of my mind, spiked with adrenaline. But the deeper, darker part of my psyche whispered of old ghost stories from my childhood, of shadows that moved and weren't cast by anything of this world. I was jarred from these thoughts by a sudden, low moan that drifted down the hallway. The sound was mournful, almost human, but twisted with a despair that felt too vast to belong to anything alive. My skin erupted in goosebumps, my stomach knotted so tightly it pained. The phone crackled to life again. "Officers are close. Stay on the line. Can you get to a room with a lock?" the voice instructed, cutting through the thick fog of my fear. Moving seemed impossible, but the desperation in the dispatcher's tone injected a fleeting vigor into my limbs. I crawled towards the kitchen, avoiding the dim outline of where I had seen the shimmer. As I reached the pantry, a small, enclosed space, I pulled open the door and shuffled inside. A clicking sound of the lock felt like a tiny victory, a thin veil of safety stretched over the gaping maw of my terror. Peering through the slits between the hinges, I held my breath, listening. The house groaned again, this time joined by a scratch at the pantry door, soft as a whisper. My heart raced, threatening to burst. I clenched my teeth, praying for the police to arrive before whatever was outside decided the wooden door was no longer a barrier. The scratching intensified suddenly, becoming a rabid, thumping assault on the flimsy door. A low gurgle accompanied the battery, a sound like laughter muffled by liquid, dredging up images of bog bodies from some nightmare. Tears streamed down my face, hot and uncontrollable. Then silence again. Heart pounding, I waited, the silence stretching into a taut thread ready to snap. A soft, almost indiscernible click echoed in the room, just as red and blue lights flashed dimly through the frosted kitchen window. Relief crashed into me with the force of a tidal wave, but it was quickly tempered by a more terrifying thought. The pantry door had unlocked itself,